The next 45 minutes will be on the changing economics of battery storage, and we've got an esteemed panel up here to give you their opinions about the changing economics of battery storage. My name is Matt Duffy. I work with Convergent Energy, and Convergent Energy and Power, we're a battery storage company, kind of changing the mold as far as integration with renewables. We look at standalone projects. With me is Dave Wagner. He canvasses this part of the country. So let's just kick it off. So we've got Caitlin Howling from Invenergy, and she will talk to us about Invenergy and their view of the changing economics of battery storage.
Okay, my name is Kate Howling. I work with Invenergy. I've been with Invenergy for 5 years now. For the first 3.5 years, I was an operations electrical engineer, and I was managing our existing battery assets, most of which were operating in the PJM fast frequency regulation market. Invenergy has over 600 megawatt hours of either contracted or early stage construction energy storage in our pipeline, with over a gigawatt hour of late stage development of energy storage in our pipeline, and many more besides that are in early stage development. So we're here today to talk about energy storage. There's many types of energy storage. So there's flywheels, there's compressed air energy, there's flow batteries. But what we really wanted to focus on today was lithium-ion batteries. I'll leave it to my other panelists to explain why lithium-ion batteries are kind of the bee's knees right now and all the hype about them. But before I dive in, I wanted to get a poll of the room. Who in this room has energy storage installed either as like a grid scale asset or even at your personal home with like a Tesla wall pack for net metering? Okay, we got three. Okay, we got 3 people. So I wanted to set the stage here, and I wanted to give a little bit of a primer on what is energy storage. All right, so when we talk about energy storage, we like to use the analogy of a water tank. One of the things that makes energy storage so unique is that it can both charge and discharge. It can be a load and a generator, which makes it a little bit confusing for how these resources are studied. But if you look at a tank of water, you have a big tank of water, and the size of the tank determines what volume of water that can hold. That's equivalent to the amount of electrons that a battery can hold. If you have a really big battery, it can hold a lot of electrons. It has a lot of energy storage capability in it. The other part of the tank is the faucet. So if you imagine this faucet, it's either draining or filling that tank. If you have a small faucet and you turn that thing all the way on till its maximum amount of water flow is going through it, if you have a really big tank and it's a small faucet, it's going to drain that tank pretty slowly. That faucet is comparable to the inverter in a battery storage system, which determines the power. So if you have, a really big tank with a really big faucet and you turn that thing all the way on, it's going to drain and refill that thing pretty fast. If you have a small faucet, it's going to drain and refill it pretty slow. So there's definitely many uses for batteries, many durations. So let's look at what that looks like practically. On the right-hand side, you have your DC bus. All those columns, those are racks of batteries. You can have 5 racks, you can have 300 racks, you can have 1 rack. You can have as many racks as you want, and that determines the size of your tank, the amount of electrons you can store in your system, or the amount of energy measured in megawatt hours or kilowatt hours that your system has. On the left-hand side is your inverter. You can have 1 inverter, 5 inverters, 300 inverters. Again, that determines the power of your system, which is equivalent to the size of that faucet. So you can have infinite combinations here, and I'll get into some of the case studies that I wanted to show you, highlight to you from Invenergy. But let's say you have 1 inverter and 4 megawatt hours worth of batteries. You can have a 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour system. The other thing I want to highlight here is the controller on the top of each of the battery racks. That's called the battery management system. That enforces all the operational limitations and warranty limitations for the battery. So let's say, for example, the temperature gets too cold in the battery enclosure, that battery management system is just going to shut it down. If the voltage range gets outside of safe operating parameters, it gets too high, it's just going to shut it down. So that's kind of the brains of the system, of the battery system. One thing that is not up here that I wanted to highlight, though, is the controller. So batteries are truly as effective as their controller is. So typically with every battery installation, you have a site controller. I really loved, I think his name was Casey, he spoke yesterday from SPP. I really love how vividly he showed what happens when you don't have good, you can't sort of 100% effectively forecast renewable energy penetration, right? He showed that chart where in a short amount of time, the wind generation just basically completely dropped off. Energy storage provides a lot of solutions for the challenges involved in renewable penetration. A controller can incorporate both forecasting, weather forecasting, price forecasting for arbitrage, as well as the operational limitations within the battery, so state of charge, warranty restrictions, and things like that, to bring you the best solution for the problems that you're facing with renewable penetration. Batteries have been around forever, right? Like, we've all had batteries in our remote controls and in our cars forever. But what really is ushering these grid scale and behind the meter batteries into the era that we're in right now is the enhanced controls. So I don't want to minimize that aspect of all of the battery storage projects that you might be thinking about, or as you move forward into thinking about them. I'm going to not spend too much time talking about the market because I'm going to leave that to my panelists. But this is a chart that you might see again today. It's a popular one, but really it just shows the growth in the energy storage market. But what I want to highlight here is that there's many different uses for energy storage, right? So we have like ancillary service, peaking capability, energy shifting, transmission, distribution, da-da-da. You have many different options for energy storage, and you can capture all of those revenues, and we like to call that revenue stacking. That's like, catchphrase these days. You can use it as much as you want. And that's how, it's because batteries can charge and discharge, they have many different applications and use cases that you can monetize. So I want to quickly go over two use cases or two examples that Invenergy has. We have a battery with MidAmerican, who's our neighbor here. This was a pilot project that MidAmerican wanted to put out because they want to get ahead of the curve on this energy storage wave that's coming. It was a 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour project. That means that we had two 40-foot ISO containers full of batteries, which is that really dark picture that we took at night on the right-hand side, and those are wired to just one single inverter. Quick highlights on that project: it was competitively bid. Upon being awarded, Invenergy had 4 months to execute all of our supply agreements, complete all of the construction, all of the manufacturing, the shipping and the delivery, and the commissioning to achieve commercial operation on that project, which was a Herculean effort. But I only highlight that to say that the amount of construction here was 1 week of construction. There's a picture on the left there. These batteries, especially in containerized solutions, they really don't take much to install. It's pretty light once you get into it. And that project is meant to sort of kind of defer some of their peak load there. Another example I wanted to bring up is a project we have with a utility, which is transmission and distribution deferral. So there's a chart on the right. Essentially, they have a generator, and they were solving for an N-1 contingency where they wanted to protect their system upon a failure. So we basically designed a battery for them that would take care of this peak load for a certain amount of time to be able to help them plan for this N-1 contingency. I'm going to shift quickly because I feel obliged to talk about safety with energy storage. I should have talked about this first because safety first, second, and third, right? But all I wanted to point out really quickly, when we talk about battery safety, I want to talk about mitigation management. With mitigation, we have our suppliers perform third-party standardized tests to certify safety. We have battery controls like the battery management system or the BMS, as I was talking about, to prevent unsafe operation. Those are things you do before the battery even gets installed, right? Then on the management side, when the battery is in operation, we monitor our batteries 24/7. We have 24/7 visibility of any system anomalies that happen. That's very common in the industry. There are detection systems and suppression systems to ensure the safety inside the battery enclosure. And there's things like ventilation to ensure safe environment for anybody working there. That's what I have for you. Thank you very much.
So a lot of folks talk about, when Dave and I make calls, a lot of folks talk about, we've looked at battery storage, but it doesn't pencil for us. Well, one of the advantages that we have with Convergent is it doesn't matter if it pencils for you or not because we pay for it. So we don't ask for any equity participation from the co-ops that we do deals with. Basically, we work with your engineers, we figure out what size is applicable to whatever use we want to do, and then we pay for it, we own it, we operate it, and then whatever savings that we come up with through the project, we share with you. So that was my plug. All right, now next, we have Bill Francis from ENGIE.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Bill Francis. I work in business development for ENGIE North America. Just a really super quick background on ENGIE. ENGIE is a really huge French multinational energy company, one of the biggest IPPs in the world. In North America, we have about 6,000, maybe more than that, give or take, people. I guess I'll skip to ENGIE North America. All right, so ENGIE made a big decision several years ago. You might have known them as GDF Suez, a French gas company in the Suez, like Suez Canal. They were, owner of International Power, some other companies. ENGIE, in their global strategy, rebranded actually that GDF Suez entity into ENGIE in order to basically shift their business from fossil coal kind of generating assets into the services and renewables business, and in North America is the proving ground for that. So in North America in particular, they've basically divested their huge natural gas, coal fleet, LNG fleet, and reinvested in a bunch of companies to do renewables project development and technology solutions, such as battery storage, for example. I'll skip past this. Just the idea here is, look, we've got a lot of co-ops and public power districts in the room. ENGIE's core principles really align closely, we believe, with the core principles and how you guys operate your companies. And frankly, that's one of the things that makes it most exciting to work with co-ops and public power districts, because saving you a buck really matters in a different way often than it does with investor-owned utilities. Okay, so now why are we talking about batteries? Well, you guys got a little bit of an understanding about what is a lithium-ion battery system, really bare bones. So why now? Well, there's a couple of things happening. Number one, everybody's probably got a phone in their pocket with a lithium-ion battery in it, but how many of you all have electric vehicles? Might be more hands than those who have Powerwalls. Okay, so 5 or 6, so double the number of folks with the Powerwall. So obviously, the electric vehicle push is going to come to different parts of this country at different times, but we've seen a really large growth, not even just in the U.S., but particularly abroad, in China, for example, with electric bus infrastructure and everything, where the manufacturing scale of those lithium-ion batteries, which essentially are the same batteries going into cars, phones, and everything else, essentially at the core, has driven a significant price reduction in that lithium-ion battery cell, which itself is one of the largest cost components of a grid-scale lithium-ion battery system. So therefore, we've seen really significant drops in overall pricing of lithium-ion batteries. In parallel, we've seen significant advances in the controllers and in the operational regimes that you can deploy with these systems. Therefore, the applications have really started to emerge that maybe weren't there before. Increasing renewables penetration has caused some grid challenges in certain areas, and therefore we have the opportunity to deploy this technology to solve those problems. So kind of there's this parallel track of costs coming down and application opportunities increasing that has kind of converged to make this a very interesting time for battery storage. And you'll notice that many different forecasts all show significant growth in energy storage deployments across the world, and it's particularly in this country. So will it be exactly how Wood Mackenzie or BNEF projects? Definitely not, right? But we all thought solar, however many decades ago, was going to be this tiny fraction of our grid, and here we are today with a much more significant growth than we thought at the time. Just really quickly talking about use cases, I think you saw a couple of examples from Kate. At the end of the day, you can deploy a battery anywhere on the grid. You can put it behind a residential home or behind a commercial meter. You can put it in front of the meter on the distribution system, or you can put it on the transmission system. And you'll hear some examples from the next panels about those different trade-offs, but you can place a battery basically of any size anywhere. You can start with your phone, and you can go all the way up to something that is multi-hundreds of megawatt hours deployed next to a giant wind farm or solar farm in the middle of nowhere. So why are costs? We have cost reductions. Well, why are the numbers working out, right? We also have tax incentives. We're starting to see solar and storage deployed and take advantage of the investment tax credit. We're also seeing kind of more advanced use cases and market participation opportunities for storage. So again, parallel path. That the story here is increasing opportunities for revenue generation and decreasing costs. Just some examples to prove that out from NG projects. We've got a solar and storage project, the middle project here in Holyoke, Massachusetts, that's doing both market services for the local utility as well as solar firming and some solar services for the solar plant that's deployed right next to it. You'll notice it's up on those fancy stilts. That's not how we always build the projects, but that happens to be located in a floodplain, so we had to build it up on top. Yes, that costs more. We also have a project that we built for United Power. That's the top project there. As an example, that's an economic project for United Power, right? They will save their customers money with that battery system. And that's an example of a Tesla Powerwall, so different technology than we'll see in the middle there. United Power is going to try to use that system as a community battery, similar to community solar. You talk to those guys if you want to know more about it. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk about it. And then we also have a number of different projects ongoing with different cooperatives and utilities on kind of non-wires alternatives or to the transmission and distribution deferral kind of concept, right? So you want to make a big investment in transmission or distribution assets, but you might be able to defer or not have to do that investment with a much smaller battery system that can solve that problem locally. So really, really quickly, just to maybe set the stage for some questions. What kinds of new innovation can we make together, right? So what kinds of new contract structures? So you talk about, will batteries pencil? Maybe they pencil for some of you, maybe they don't yet for others. But what we'd really like to hear from you is under what circumstances can we help you deploy a battery or a battery plus solar, battery plus wind, or whatever. And what would the contract structure need to look like? You heard a little bit from the Convergent guys about, well, we can build it and operate it and share savings. That's one contract structure. There might be others, so we'd really appreciate some feedback from you all about what you think might work and how we can help you. A lot of times the most innovation happens when the customers and the kind of developers come together. The second piece here is electric vehicles, right? So everybody likes to talk about, and I asked at the beginning, what's going to happen with electric vehicles? This panel's not about electric vehicles, but there are a lot of concepts out there about deploying distribution battery assets to help offset some of the concerns about the penetration of electric vehicle charging infrastructure because of the potential for demand spikes associated with those appliances. So something also to think about, emerging applications due to the larger and larger penetration of EVs. That's it for me. I ran a little over time, but hopefully not too bad. If you guys have questions, we'll take them at the end. Thanks.
A lot of folks refer to battery storage as the Swiss Army knife of energy solutions. And like a Swiss Army knife, if you've opened all of the things at once, you can't use it. Battery storage is very much the same. And so the non-wires alternative that he spoke about, Convergent has a really interesting project up in Boothbay, Maine. They were having summer peaking problems, and they were going to have to build an 18-mile transmission line at about $1 million a mile. And we approached them and said, what about a 1 megawatt battery where we would put it at your substation, give you control of that, and then during the summertime, they dispatched it when they saw that their need for peaking power came along. So basically saved them $18 million. And then it turns out their biggest client, which is a hospital in Boothbay, closed. So if they had built the $18 million transmission line, it would have been for naught. So that's one of the applications of the Swiss Army knife that battery storage offers you. So now we're going to listen to Sarah Mills from Able Grid.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Mills with Able Grid Energy Solutions. I've been with Able Grid for about 1.5 years. We've been around for 2 years and mostly came from the wind and solar industry, seeing a big opportunity for batteries, especially as the technology is about where it was when we all started in solar and wind several years ago. So Able Grid develops battery storage systems that are they're standalone systems, so not necessarily co-located with wind or solar or with any other generator. We're an independent developer. Oh, these are my older slides. Which means we're not tied to any particular manufacturer or technology for our batteries, so we are developing sites with lithium-ion batteries in mind. And we also don't have any specific owner or operator that we need to work with. Our projects are largely very large, so 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. So that's, I think, something that distinguishes us from Bill, although we have a lot of things in common in terms of how we are approaching batteries and the different things that they can do. And you can see on the right here the map of where we're active in the US, so all across the country looking for different opportunities and different applications. where they work in different places. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, so just west of here, and then we're 14 employees right now. So I think my unique perspective here is standalone storage as opposed to co-located storage, or really thinking about storage just in the context of renewables. I think most people have come to storage and started thinking about storage either as a utility who wants to have a lot of renewable energy generated for your customers and need to balance that, or as a grid operator who's trying to manage a grid that has a lot of renewable energy on it. But a battery is a battery, and it can do a lot of things outside of that construct, so that's really what I want to focus on here. We like to say, Dave just mentioned the Swiss Army knife. We like to say that it's bacon to electric grid. It enhances other aspects of the grid, other generators, transmission assets. It can do a lot of different things. So integrating renewable energy is something we've talked about, but it's also a very fast ramping resource, so it could be paired with a gas generator, for example, to do faster ramping than a gas generator is typically capable of. Or it can be located, standalone system can be located anywhere you want to on the grid to either manage renewable energy coming from a lot of facilities or renewable energy coming into load or whatever function works best for you. It can also mitigate volatility in that a storage project that's co-located with solar and taking advantage of the ITC has to charge primarily from that solar facility that's co-located with, where standalone storage has the flexibility to charge from the grid as well as a whole, and then discharge back to the grid when that's needed. And finally, people have already talked about deferring investment in transmission infrastructure, so I won't spend time on that. So this is a graphic from the Smart Electric Power Alliance that shows, I think, how people typically think of energy storage. So you can see, I'm going to focus on your left side of this, and it shows what battery coupled with solar, and battery coupled with either hydro or natural gas plants can do. And I would actually argue that batteries by themselves can do all of the things that are listed here on this left side. So a battery can provide ancillary services anywhere on the grid. So it can perform these functions with more flexibility than you get with a co-located resource. It can do fast ramping, as I kind of described with the gas facility. It can smooth power not just from the one co-located generator, but for as many generators on the grid as you have coming into the location where you choose to put it. Peaking capacity is something people have already talked about. And longer duration batteries could provide baseload power, though we're not seeing a lot of that today. So I would just say compared to the solar plus storage systems that are coming online, there's just more flexibility to do these things with a standalone system. And finally, this is just a different way to show data that's already been shown with the battery prices and how they've come down in the last several years, looking at like 20% decreases year over year, and probably expect that to be happening going forward. And that's really enabled a lot more applications to become cost effective for storage and for utilities to use storage for a variety of different needs. And this just shows, I bring this up here to show that battery reductions are not just the only place where costs could come down. You have two different types of systems you could build for battery storage. So we've seen the container systems on slides already. A larger system could be built as a building, which looks a lot like a data center. So there are opportunities in either one of these for cost reductions. You can see the EPC on the top, the enclosures, whether it's the containers that we've seen before, or just more cost-effective buildings as more people do this and figure out how to do it more efficiently. And then equipment, inverters, controllers, and the batteries that have already been talked about. So we see a lot more opportunity for costs to come down in the next several years and create more places where storage is cost-effective. So that's all I've got, and happy to take questions later.
So in the interest of saving time for questions, I won't do another corporate plug. I'll just introduce the next person. Graham Morin from Siemens.
Morning, everybody. Graham Morin with Siemens, and for those of you that recognize Siemens, you might know us for a lot of different ways that we touch the energy grid, and a whole lot more than that, from traditional thermal generation, fossil fuels fire generation. We're a major manufacturer of wind turbines. We have a large stake in the solar business through a company called Keiko New Energy that manufactures solar inverters. We don't do panels, but we are, very, very heavily integrated into that market as well. Siemens, by way of a joint venture that we have with a company called AES, this group called Fluence is actually one of the leaders in terms of worldwide energy storage development as well. We talked yesterday, there was a number of references to how the people's slides were already out of date because this industry moves so fast. Well, this slide's out of date already as well too. We say we have 485 megawatts of storage already awarded. That number is actually more like a gigawatt now. This is an older slide. Up to as big as we have a 400 megawatt hour project that's under construction in California right now with plans for significant expansion from there beyond a gigawatt hour of capacity. So whether we're talking, small scale, smaller scale, kind of behind the meter systems, all the way to giant utility scale, Fluence has capabilities of that. We don't do residential, but anything from CNI at a few hundred kilowatt level all the way up to whatever you can imagine, we can help with that. I'm not going to talk too much about what's going on in the battery industry because my cohorts here have already covered that very well. I'm going to talk more about some of the considerations, and I'm going to actually focus more on kind of either the kind of municipal down to CNI type applications, just because I think it bears its own little special mention here. And I'm going to try to relate that to how is that translatable to what's going on in Nebraska, and how can Nebraska capitalize on that through either the public power companies or actual end users in conjunction with SPP. I think we've touched on almost all of these points already in terms of how the grid is decarbonizing very quickly, and that causes opportunity and it causes challenges. So how do we mitigate those challenges and work together to make sure that we have the most cost-effective and reliable supply of energy for the state of Nebraska and SPP in general? One of the things that I highlight here, and it was great to hear about what South Sioux City kind of has going with their projects with storage and other forms of generation, is we see that our end users are becoming more and more incentivized to become prosumers of electricity. It's all dependent on the specific rate structures on where you are, but as we see the end user getting more and more access to more of the wholesale kind of real-time market or day-ahead market, and they have assets that can provide flexibility and mitigation to some of those disruptions that we see, and energy imbalances, frequency disruptions, et cetera. And if they can be compensated for that, there's a lot of untapped capabilities on that side of the meter as well. And so I guess my overarching message to the room is, don't forget about the demand side. Certainly, economies of scale on energy is really driving down pricing, but there's a lot of untapped potential on the demand side as well. One of the other things that we see at Siemens, and we're very focused on, is you kind of have this issue in the utility industry and other industries kind of adjacent to it in terms of the aging workforce. And we as a large manufacturer, a large service provider, are struggling to find competent talent to come work and to work on these projects and maintain these systems. I was really heartened to see, we've got a couple of the community colleges here in Nebraska, and they've been very forward-leaning in that regard in terms of developing new talent. And Siemens really encourages that up and to the point that we want to be a part of that, and we are sponsoring those kinds of projects and programs to foster that. I think this has been said already. Again, these are SPP slides from 2018, and if you were paying attention yesterday, you could see just how out of date some of these numbers already are. But the big thing here, and the saying that I really like that came from this gentleman, Shale Khan at Green Tech Media, is, traditionally, utilities always used to forecast demand and dispatch load. Well, that's changing, obviously. Now it's because of the intermittencies and the quickly changing aspects of renewable generation. In the future, it's going to be, we're going to forecast generation, and we're going to have to dispatch load. So again, it's all about the flexibility and trying to foster and enable flexibility and compensate flexibility on the demand side is going to be a very important part of the future of the grid, not just here in Nebraska, but probably worldwide. So again, not gonna dwell on this too much. Again, these graphs are out of date at this point. They're less than a year old, but they're way out of date at this point. But again, it's how do we solve that problem? Is we've got a lot of energy from the renewable side already in the ground in SPP. There's more that's looking to interconnect, but how are we going to do that? How are we going to enable that? And one of the big things that we got to do is we got to do things around load growth. We've got to do things about load flexibility. So EVs, data centers, flexible assets in traditional manufacturing base load that we can give ourselves some flexibility to accept more load or to provide more load, more energy back when it's needed is going to be one of those strategies. I see a huge opportunity on an economic development side for the state of Nebraska on just working together to provide existing customers or new manufacturing that wants to come in, that may need backup generation or something like that, how do we optimize that so that the grid is getting benefit from it, but the end user is getting benefit as well and can justify investments in smarter infrastructure to provide the flexibility that tomorrow's grid is going to need. So, three big questions that I kind of captured on ways that I think Nebraska should be kind of considering kind of the path forward as it relates to everything that you're doing, storage, generation, load management, et cetera. What happens if we reach kind of a technical cap in terms of we can't bring on any more generation? We said SPP is a 50 megawatt or 50 gigawatt peak, and we've got 90 gigawatts in the queue, not to mention all the stuff that's already in the ground. What do we do about that? Who's going to train that workforce? Is it going to be Northeast or is it going to be some other community colleges? We have done those kinds of programs in other parts of the country. We think Nebraska is a ripe market for similar programs that are targeted to the needs of Nebraskans and maybe the greater Southwest Power Pool more generally. And then how can these distributed assets, what are the rules going to be? It can't be kind of a bespoke, customized program for every single project. So can we get to more of a market-based approach for the 10 different value streams that I think Casey mentioned yesterday that energy storage can provide? Are the utilities going to have smart rate tariffs that can incentivize those that have this flexibility so that investment can come into the state? Those are the kinds of things that we'd like to see the state of Nebraska in general kind of focus on, and we would be happy to help try to answer those questions. So again, another out-of-date interconnect pie chart there. That has grown pretty significantly, but with that, I'm going to save the rest of my time here for questions, open it up to the panel, turn it back over to Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for your contributions to today's changing economics of battery storage. It's always fun to be up with your potential competitors and sharing good ideas about how to capture the market. So I'd like to open it up to questions. Hopefully there are a couple out there. If not, we can have Dave ask a question. Yes, sir.
I'm interested in the panelists' views on distributed behind-the-meter storage and its economics.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with my points there. I see certainly there's economies of scale if you're on the utility side, and you'll see the probably a lower per kilowatt cost if you do a large scale utility system. But when you start to factor in other potential benefits such as resiliency and just overall, there's power quality benefits potentially. If you can monetize or value those, certainly behind the meter storage becomes much more attractive A good example of that is going on right now in Northern California. About 3 years ago, Siemens was part of a team that delivered a microgrid to a Native American reservation up there called the Blue Lake Rancheria. And if you look in the news today, I encourage you guys to look that up. If you're interested, you'll see that reservation has now become an oasis of just refuge for people that are losing their power during these PG&E outlets or outages. But how do you monetize something like that? How do you assess the value of something like that? That's the real challenge. So if it starts, I think, with being able to monetize and have access to the wholesale markets, SPP or otherwise, but really trying to put a value in terms of resiliency and backup capabilities is really the key when you're dealing with those behind the meter projects. And how do you cost justify? Because yes, you are going to have a higher cost of delivered kilowatt, but there's a whole lot of other benefits around having that local capacity available, whether it's behind the meter or at a municipal level.
Just to follow up on that, at Convergent, we actually cut our teeth with behind the meter type of applications with battery storage, specifically aimed at targeting the demand charge by the G&T. So, we're just signed a contract with Shell at one of their refineries for a 21 megawatt battery. And basically it's behind their meter, and what we're going to do is we'll deploy the battery when we anticipate that the demand charge will be levied by the ISO. And in turn, they save money as a result of not having a higher demand charge. So that's all behind the meter type of stuff. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Question for Sarah. What is your largest operational project?
We don't have any operating projects yet. We have several projects under development, hopefully 2 going into construction next year. But as I said, typically our projects are pretty large, so 20, 50, 100 megawatt projects.
If I can summarize, what are the barriers to battery storage in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think we can probably all share something here, but I would say that there's a lot of education still going on with utilities and end users because I think just to echo what Graham was saying, I think there's, as the Swiss Army knife that energy storage is, it can be hard to sort of understand how to monetize all of those applications. I think that the contracting structure is also like an interesting conundrum a little bit with energy storage because you can utilize it in so many ways. You're not just contracting something as solar where it's as gen, right? Like you just get all of our generation. It's so much more than that. And so to kind of, you can understand those theoretically, but then to write it down in a contracting structure has been a unique challenge. But Invenergy has certainly gone through that in multiple different contract structures with our customers and along with, I think, everybody at this table has contracted projects.
Maybe I'll try to add a couple of things really quickly. Number one, we talked about this, but put a price on it. Energy storage developers do best when you can say, if you do this, we'll pay you that. And if you give us a nebulous sort of like, well, maybe we have this problem, but we don't know how to value it. It's super difficult to develop for that because frankly, we have to make money too. At the end of the day, all of us do. Second thing, uncertainty around tariffs and equipment supply. I guess that's a little bit of a tough subject, and I don't want to go way into it. But essentially, uncertainty. If you give us certainty about a tariff or certainty about cost of equipment, that's really helpful. And obviously, that's not for anybody in this room necessarily to solve, but that has created challenges in particular in the last couple of years. And thirdly, maybe the product integration isn't quite as mature in the market as like for solar. You can pick any, solar, you can pick any inverter, any module, any rack, and you can kind of figure it all out. It doesn't totally work that way with battery systems. You're still solving immense challenges on the integration of the product and making sure that the batteries work with the inverters and the whole controller knows what it's talking to. And there are a lot more bespoke solutions, especially for larger systems that have a lot to do with the integration. So to give credit to big developers like Invenergy, like Engie, like frankly probably everybody at this table, there's a lot of work that goes into actually integrating the product, and that isn't quite as like plug and play as it is in other industries yet.
Yeah, and I would certainly echo there's a lot of education that's happening, though I do think Nebraska with the public power system is set up better than other places to really see and capture the value of storage. So we all talked about sort of generation functions and transmission functions. And in a regulated state, for example, those things are typically studied differently. The utility values them separately. A PUC looks at them as separate things. So to see the full value of storage, a utility might say it's not cost effective because they studied it for just capacity, but really you could use that facility for a bunch of other things and it would be cost effective. So because you have this public power model here, you're looking more holistically at the benefits of the things that storage can do and also how that impacts your community versus the other resources you would use to fill those needs. So I think there's a real opportunity here.
I would echo what my cohorts say there. I mean, put in my own words, I guess it's, having adequate and fair price signals to support all the different things that storage can do is certainly a huge issue and one that we work every day to try to get clarified, to try to open up the playing field for storage. The other interesting thing that we run into a lot of time is just clarification of ownership models, specifically, whether it's a P3 or third-party ownership model, and you can't do that everywhere. So trying to try to outline and line out, all the different rules for different parts of the country makes for a kind of a patchwork of regulations that can make it challenging sometimes of, am I selling this system? Am I gonna sell it as, energy and grid services as a service? That gets challenging a lot of times too.
I just want to point to a resource quickly. Energy Storage Association, or ESA, is an advocacy group for energy storage, as it turns out. And I don't think they've released it yet, but they have developed a set of recommendations for like storage as having multiple uses and things like that they're going to publish. So I do think that will kind of be a beacon for the industry to kind of rally around.
Yeah, just to put a bow on it, from my standpoint, it is information. And, a lot of typical calls are, to a utility, have you heard about battery storage? And folks say, yeah. And then 15 minutes later, they go, oh, I didn't realize that that's what battery storage is all about. So it's really an information game. We're kind of at the, beginning part of a really cool industry. So we have one last question. It's by Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Wagner with Convergent. They've referenced me ominously. I sat down there because in storage terms, I'm only at about 50% charge today. But I have a question that I want to put to the panel. I'm going to kind of put them on the spot. And the reason that I want to ask it is for the past year, I'm out every week talking to various members of rural co-ops throughout the Midwest, throughout MISO and SPP. And one of the questions that I get, probably more than anything, which one could argue is relevant or not, but since I get it enough, I thought you might be interested, is I get from folks on a couple times a week, they want to know, this might be more geared toward Graham since it's kind of on the manufacturing, but they're looking at storage projects, or they're interested in it, and they're curious about the long-term pricing of lithium ion, and they're always asking about what we think the pricing of lithium ion is going to do moving forward, and the reason being is because what with the rapid injection of EVs into the market worldwide, what's that going to do with lithium ion and pricing, and is that something that people need to consider with storage projects today? Graham, I'm looking at you.
I wish you wouldn't have asked that. I certainly have my own personal opinions on it, but they're not Siemens or Fluence's official words on these. But I mean, you're going to continue to see reductions in the price of lithium-ion cells. There was some concern a couple of years ago related to a large number of these cells use cobalt as part of the raw materials that go into it, and there was concerns about shortages of cobalt globally and what effect that would have. That's largely hasn't been an issue as far as I can tell. So I mean, we're definitely seeing the prices come down, maybe not as dramatically as they had. They're kind of leveling off. But certainly at the utility scale, I think we see prices that are for the 4-hour systems below let's say $300 a kilowatt hour and falling. It's the question of is how far below that, and how far do they need to go before it really becomes uneconomic to think about other generation capacity, alternatives when it goes there. But again, these are my observations. They're not what you would see, and it's so use case specific and site specific, so that number could be all over the place. But I think that's kind of the number where you see a lot of the industry publications kind of trending towards it at this point, if not even a little better than that.
Well, I think that's a wrap. We went about 3 minutes over. I apologize. But if we can give a hand for our panelists.